Hiya, it's Cole here from the Mounts Retreat, and as I promised on LinkedIn, I was going to do a video for police officers and PTSD. Now, what you're going to learn here is how trauma is encoded in the brain and how we decode it with psychosensory techniques, but we have to go right back to the beginning. So you're a police officer on patrol, and an event happens. As we know, the police deal with these kind of events on a daily basis. So we got to hear car crash, a murder scene, abuse cases, death, violence, riot, 999 call, and dealing with victims. Okay, these are almost like an everyday event for police officers. But eventually, one of these will be encoded in the brain, felt in the body, as a traumatic memory. Or you may have a whole host of them. Okay, then you get labelled with complex PTSD. So there we have it. You have your event. You have the encoding in the brain based on one of these scenarios that happened or happens on a daily basis. So what do you do with it? You finish your shift, you go home, and you add it to all your everyday life stress. Children, relationships, money, health, all your everyday life stress is now added on with the encoded traumatic memories and experiences. So throughout the day, throughout your life, you're working hard, your partner may become ill, so then you start to worry about your finances, so your stress starts to build up and up, and at night time you go to sleep and you dream, and you release some of this stress, so it comes down. So you get back on with your life, just like before. But then it happens again, and this seems to be a pattern of life. Life stress goes up, you become ill, someone passes away, relationship issues, money issues. You dream, the brain reprocesses it, releases it, lets it go if it's not needed for your safety. It's the life cycle. But you have encoded trauma. So your level is already up here now. Okay? You don't dream this stuff away. There is symptoms of trauma that come along because of the event, because of the encoding in the brain. And those symptoms will be flashbacks, nightmares, insomnia, isolation, intrusive thoughts, physical sensations in the body, pain, relationship issues. You start taking out on your partner or your children. Addictive behavior. So after your shift, you go straight down the pub, start gambling. The list goes on and on. So what you're trying to do, you have your symptoms and you're trying to deal with it. So you realize now I have a problem. Maybe you're stressed about going to work, or you start going sick. What you do, you suddenly become brave, because it takes guts to admit that you have an issue. You go and see HR, go and see your GP. If you're lucky, you might see by a full psychologist. But what will happen, you go and see your GP, put you on medication. Okay, so now you're on meds. This now adds to the symptoms. Okay, if you're really lucky, you get sent for CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, or some of the really clever ones call it TF, trauma focused or trauma formed CBT. In other words, what this is a talk based therapy. What you're going to discover as we go on in the video, that talking about your issue doesn't change it. Because if it did, there'd be no people walking around with PTSD. So what happens now? You're on meds. You're going back to your shifts the next day. You see another traumatic event. It gets encoded, and then your stress bucket of life, starts to overflow. These symptoms get worse. Go to your GP again. Highs your medication up. CBT didn't work, so they now send you for EMDR, eye movement therapy. A great form of therapy. Let me just quickly demonstrate to you. There's your eyes. You go for EMDR, and they move your eyes bilaterally, like this, with a finger. You keep your head still, and you move your eyes. The only trouble is, a lot of people come to our retreat who've had like 30 sessions of EMDR. But they can still think of the traumatic memory and make it bother them. That's because in a split second, your eyes may have looked here when you recoded that traumatic memory. So moving your eyes here as much as you want does not touch the imprinted trauma up there. I use IEMT, VCD, visual code displacement therapy, and another form of eye movement therapy, where we kind of hit every axis of the eye movement. So remember, if your trauma's here and you're moving your eyes here in the EMDR, you can go for 30 sessions. You go for 60 or 90. You will not touch the imprint. The imprint is here. Other eye movement therapies, you can touch that, de-link it. So now, what's happening in your life is you're dealing with the symptoms and not treating the cause. You're going through your CBT, sitting there talking about the events that's happened to you, get upset, get wound up by them, get angry with them. You leave the CBT, the therapist's office, and you still feel shit. That's because talking about your issue does not affect or resolve where it's stored in the brain. So now we're going to go and discover what I call basic neuroscience, because I want to make sure you understand this. It's important for me that you understand this. So now we come to your brain. I don't care how big it is or how small. We're coming to the encoding of trauma. The beauty of the work that I do for the last almost 30 years is everyone's story is different. As a human being, everyone encodes trauma exactly the same way in the brain. So when you work with someone like me, you don't even have to talk about your issue, the traumatic event that happened to you that encoded the trauma. Because remember, language is your prefrontal cortex, it's the most human part of your brain. Encoded trauma is within the limbic system, specifically the basal lateral amygdala. Okay, this part of the brain doesn't understand language. It also has no timestamp. So that's why when you think of your unpleasant memory or event, you can still almost feel like you're back there in time, like you're reliving it, because it's the emotional part of your brain. The limbic system doesn't understand language and memories don't get time-stamped. So why are we sending people for CBT, talk-based therapy, for PTSD, when it doesn't touch it? Anyway, that's another video. Let's get to the encoding of trauma. We have the thalamus, that is like your post office. Everything comes in through all your senses into your thalamus, and that then decides where other parts of the brain it sends the signal. We're interested in the basal lateral amygdala. So you've had your traumatic event, okay? And in that moment, you have a very strong brainwave, the fastest brainwave, a gamma brainwave. Comes down the axon, so you have your neurons in your brain, okay? Billions of them. This is your pre, this is your post. Presynaptic, the synaptic is the space between the neurons. Pre and post. So you have your traumatic event. A gamma wave comes down the axon to the axon terminal. So that's the end of that neuron. And here, because of this, and because the event you happen, releases certain chemicals in the synaptic gap. It's what the brain is designed to do. And then on the postsynaptic gap, on the post neuron, we have receivers. Now receivers, for this particular encoded trauma, is AMPA receptors. Okay, so this is oscillating at a very fast gamma wave, releasing the right kind of chemicals in the synaptic gap to fit these AMPA receptors here. It's a bit like a lock and key. They have to fit in the right sequence and the right oscillation to encode it as a traumatic memory. So now, you think of your traumatic event, or you've seen it, and this is another thing is, just by thinking about it, because remember it's not time-stamped, you can still think about that unpleasant memory, it can make it bother you. That's because these AMPA receptors have come to the surface now. So you have your traumatic event, even just by thinking about it, the gamma wave comes along, it releases the right chemicals in the gap. So then calcium is a messenger. Calcium oscillating at this right voltage and chemicals comes into that neuron, into that membrane. And it's now saying to the brain and the body, we need to store this as an unpleasant or traumatic memory so we can avoid feeling it again in the future. So your brain and your body are doing exactly what they were designed to do. So calcium comes into the cell and it communicates with an enzyme called PKM zeta. Now PKM zeta is now communicating to that neuron to send more AMP receptors to the surface. It's going, burp, 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 danger, shit, we need to record this. So more AMP receptors come to the surface. And they get called what's called phosphorylate. In other words, they get glued onto the surface of that membrane by PKM zeta. And then the rest of the signal then tells other parts of the brain, shit, this is danger. This is now where you have fight, flight, freeze response and all the stress chemicals, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol. All of a sudden now you have an encoded traumatic memory. So trauma isn't what happened to you. Trauma is what happens inside of you based on what happened to you. So here you have it. This is encoded trauma in the brain. The event could be a car crash, abuse stories or cases, okay, a murder scene. It doesn't matter. That's the why. This is how you do trauma. Every human being does it the same way. So that's it. You've seen a dramatic event. The gamma wave comes down, releases the right voltage and chemicals in the synaptic gap. The lock and key fits for these AMP receptors. Calcium enters the cell. It communicates with an enzyme called PKM zeta to go, oh, shit, danger. Send more AMP receptors to the surface. Let's glue these to the surface to protect you for the rest of your life. Once they're glued on, there was believed no shut-off domain for that encoding. Whenever you think about it, your flashbacks, your nightmares, whatever, you're re-traumatizing yourself by keep playing over the flashbacks and nightmares because you're firing off this signal. You're now in fight or flight, so you get stressed, tense before you go to work because you're thinking, oh shit, last week I went to that scene and it still bothers me when I think about it. And just by thinking about it, your brain has the encoding, so you can go into fight, flight and freeze, all those nasty stress chemicals flooding your body. I hope you understand that because this is explained so simply that this is your trauma, not the event, because the events are always going to happen. But if you learn how to decode your trauma, how to control your own brain, your own neuroscience, your own chemicals, that's real mental health. Because remember, if you keep building this stuff up, going to each and every one of these scenes, you're encoding more and more traumatic events. So no wonder you don't want to go to work. No wonder you drink. No wonder you do all the avoidance and coping skills. Because you believe there's no way out. Often as well, you're told by professionals, once you have trauma, you have it for life. Bullshit, okay? I'm living proof of that. I've worked with thousands of people. They come from all over the world to come to our retreat and we decode the trauma. Remember, we can't go back in time and history and change the event, but what you can do is you can de-link the emotions from the memories. So now I'm going to go on to the next slide, or paper, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to talk about how we remove an encoded trauma. So we do this with psychosensory techniques. Now psychosensory means psycho, brain, and sensory means touch, whether you're tapping or havening or eye movement, okay? Here we still have the same neurons, okay, the pre and the post. But this time, when you come to work with me, I get you to think about the memory. Just think about it, not talk about it, just think about it. And remember what the thinking does? Thinking about it, your brain goes, I remember that as an unpleasant memory experience. It's encoded as traumatic. So my job is I just want you to fire off these AMPA receptors, just for a short while, maybe for like 30 seconds, just thinking about the event. While they're firing off, we do the technique, and this time we bring in delta waves. Now delta waves are a slow oscillating frequency. As you can see, very slow. And because that oscillates at that frequency, it releases different chemicals in the synaptic gap. It still releases calcium, because calcium is a messenger, okay? and it still needs to fit and lock in these receptors. But because the delta wave is oscillating now into this neuron at a different frequency, okay, calcium is still entering the cell, but this time, because it's doing that, it's communicating with calcineurin, dynamin, and clathrin. Okay, this is the beauty. These three things go to work, and what they do is they dephosphorylate. In other words, they de-link the glue that was holding the AMPA receptors on the surface previously. Let me say that again. You do the techniques that increases delta waves in the brain. Delta waves oscillate different electrical, chemical reaction in the synaptic gap. Calcium is still the messenger, it comes in, but this time it tells the membrane, calcineurin, dynamin, and clathrin that we're safe. It's okay. We don't need the stress chemicals. Because remember, previously, you think of the traumatic memory, gamma wave comes in, this is oscillating with the right electrical, chemical signal to say, shit, it's dangerous. We need to release the stress chemicals, adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol. Then you get the fight-flight response. It's encoded, and you get all the symptoms. This way, delta wave comes in, and it's telling you, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. So it starts to release the good chemicals, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, or the feel-good chemicals. Okay. So they go to work, and they de-link, they unglue the AMPA receptors to the surface. The AMPA receptors go back inside the membrane to be removed, and they break down. They break down in the cell. Now, because there's no AMPA receptors glued to the surface of that membrane, guess what happens? You can no longer send the signal down that neuron to other neurons and go, danger, because there is no danger. The AMPA receptors are drawn back inside the neuron. You de-link the AMPA receptors from the surface, means no more symptoms. No more symptoms. Gone. No more symptoms. You can get back on with your work, get back on with your life. And you can go to each and every memory, you do the technique. All we're interested in doing is increasing delta waves, bringing in the right electrical chemicals in the synaptic gap. Calcium enters the cell, AMPA receptors get drawn back inside. Once they've drawn back inside, they can no longer send the signal of the stress response. So our whole aim is to increase delta waves that target the AMPA receptors. AMPA receptors are removed, recycled, and broken down. You can no longer be bothered by that memory or that event. So there you have neuroscience quickly on how trauma is encoded in the brain and how we remove the trauma. Remember, like I said previously, you can't go back in history and change the event, but what you can do is remove the encoding. So you still know that you went to a car crash, you still know you went to a murder scene, but when you think about it now, it can't bother you because it's not encoded. So there you have it. This should be taught to every police officer in their training. That's real mental health, that you can be taught how to change your neuroscience. Because imagine now, if you finish your shift and you've seen one of these unpleasant events, you don't take it home, you don't take it down the pub, you don't do whatever you do to have the symptoms, the flashbacks, the nightmares, the insomnia, the intrusive thoughts, all those negative symptoms, when you can just remove the encoding. The matter of fact, this should be brought in at the end of every police officer's shift. If you had a shitty shift, you should do the psychosensory techniques to decode the events that you've seen on that day. It should be an automatic part of your day. You go to work, you see the shitty scenes, because remember, you're in a job where you're going to deal with all these kind of scenes on a daily, weekly, yearly career path pattern life. But if you can go inside here and change the encoding, that is real mental health. I'm not sending you for CBT and talking about it, because remember, this is happening, not that side, the encoding, well, this happens as well, but the encoding is happening in the limbic system, the emotional part of your brain, okay? Right in the middle of your brain. Talking about it in CBT or counselling It's cortex behavior, language, awareness, understanding. It can't touch this. It doesn't touch this. And the reason I know is because I'm also a trained counsellor. And we've had people come to the retreat and they've had cancer and they spent thousands of pounds and they come here and say, oh, I've had cancer and I'll put it in a little box behind me. Cool. But when you think of that memory, can you make it bother you? Oh shit, yes I can. Because it's in the emotional part of your brain, your limbic system. So don't go for CBT to deal with trauma. Work with someone who understands how trauma is encoded in the brain and then how to change the memories and events. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed the short video. I hope it's informative. If you want to work with me, and everything's all confidential and private as you would expect. Now I've worked with hundreds of police officers, hundreds of veterans, because that's the reason I come into this work. If you read my profile, the website is www.themanceretreat.com. There's videos on there, there's talks, there's all kinds of things on our website. So my wife and I run this retreat. We do 3-day retreats, we do 1-day retreats, and we do one-off sessions if you have just one specific trauma. We have people come from all over the world to come to our retreats because we understand how trauma is encoded in the brain and how to shift it. Is there anything else I can tell you? Just message me if you want to know more information. There is quite a waiting list to work with us, but that is it. I hope that was very informative to you. Don't allow your life stress bucket to get in, because this is the trouble. The trauma builds and builds and builds and builds. The meds don't work. The CBT, as I've shown you, doesn't work. The EMDR, sometimes it works if the imprint is here and here, then it shifts it. Keeps building up. Everyday life stress happens. These are getting worse. Your symptoms are getting worse because you're having more encoded traumatic memories, maybe every shift you go on. Because the small things suddenly become the big fucking things, okay? But the sad reality is, you get here, and this is when people decide it's too much, and they end their life. All because they have encoded unpleasant memories and experiences in their brain, and they weren't taught that you can actually change it. So remember, I deal with the cause, not the symptoms. And the cause is you. Not that you're broken, because your brain and body were doing what you're designed to do. I don't treat the symptoms. I don't treat these. I go to the memories and experiences and make it feel real to you. And the memories and experiences are all those things that you've witnessed and seen and encoded in your brain. So I don't treat the label. PTSD, PTS, call it what you want, complex PTSD, that's the label. And that is your, in a sense, that is your why. You can go to counselling and go, oh, I went to a 9-9 call and I felt really bad because I went to a really violent scene and I saw someone beating up and then they started attacking me and then I can't sleep and I don't want to go to work anymore. And then you leave your counselling session feeling shit and feeling the same. And you go back the next week or the next month and you talk about it again. And you keep talking about violence. And in the meantime, you may see another 20 violent scenes in that time before after the original imprint. So remember, the bucket of life stress goes up. So I deal with the how. And the how is the memories and experience of those events. So what do? How is a memory created? Remember, we know what the why is. We can't change the why. Okay, so let's talk about what happened. Do you have your violent episode or you've seen violence? Okay, it's encoded in your brain. So when you think of that now, when you think of that memory, it's either a movie, a picture, and then is it in colour or black and white? Do that now. Think of an unpleasant memory or scene that you've been in and just close your eyes and notice, is it a movie? Is it a picture? Is it colour and black and white? Okay, and then is there any sound to this movie or picture? If there is, Notice what it is. Is it words? Is it what you're saying? Is it what they're saying? Okay. Any feelings or sensations in the body when you think of this unpleasant memory? It's amazing. Nobody's ever had, when I've almost 30 years I work with people, individuals, groups, no one's ever had a feeling in their toe. Okay. It's normally always from the waist above. Tightness in the chest. Sweaty palms. Tightness in my shoulders. I feel stiff. My breathing's fast. It's slow. I look down. Okay. And when you look at this memory, are you associated or disassociated? What does that mean? That means when you close your eyes, are you seeing it through your own eyes as if it's happening to you again, or are you like watching it? If you're associated, that means it's more traumatic. And then 0 to 10, when you think of this unpleasant memory, 0 no emotion, 10 high. What's the score? If it's really traumatic, it's going to be 10. A lot of people go to me, it's 20. Well, I'll just ask you a simple question. Is it 0 to 10? This is no trick. It's just a scale to let you know where you are. As me as the change worker, I don't call myself a therapist because I don't do therapy. I do change work. So 0 to 10, and you go, it's a 10. So there we have it. That is your how. Remember, we know the why. The why is the violent scenes that you're involved in. We don't care about the why. We can't change the why. We can't go back in time and change why. But what we want to know is, how do you create internally your unpleasant traumatic memory? So it's the how. And you do the how by, when you think of it, is it a movie, picture, colour, black and white? Any sound, any feelings? Are you associated or dissociated? Give me a score. That's it. That's how you do your how for that particular memory. And then we do the techniques. We do the psychosensory techniques. Remember? Psycho thinking, sensory tapping, or havening, or moving your eyes. So it's almost like a CD disc, or DVD disc, if you remember those. You put it into the player, you can create your unpleasant memory experience. I use the pause button, I inject it, we take it out of the player, I get you to do the techniques, and the techniques are like putting scratches over the disc. So when you try and put it in and play it again, it doesn't play the same. So it might have been a movie, it now becomes a picture. It might have been colour, it becomes black and white. There may have been sound, the sound goes. The feeling sensations in the body change and shift. It was associated and now it's like you're looking at it from a distance. So it was a 10, it's now come down to a 6. We do it again. We take the disc out, we do the psychosensory techniques, we put it back in, more scratches, try and play it. Now this becomes fuzzy. People say, a great example my wife uses is, it's like the two magnets when you try and put them together, they just kind of do this. And that's what people say. They look around, I'll see them, they look around the room for the memory. Previously, it was a 10. Now they go, I can't even see the picture. I can't get back into it. There's no sound. The feelings have gone. Yeah, disassociated. It's now a 2. Cool. Notice how you know it's a 2. Go back. We take the disc out. We do the psychosensory techniques. This is all shifted. Now they say, I can't even see the memory. This is now 0. Job done. Memory has been decoded in the limbic system. You still know there was a violence against you, or you witnessed violence. You still know that, but the trouble is, we kind of screwed up the memory. We've delinked the AMPA receptors from the surface, remember? So it's a 0. And this takes minutes. So thank you for watching this video. Hope you found it informative. www.themansretreat.com, or send me a message on LinkedIn. And let's change your traumatic memories. Trauma is not for life. Okay? Have a great day.
I went to see him in late January 2022 for a trauma that I'd been suffering from for over the last 30 years. When we first started, he asked me to score my trauma between 1 to 10, and it was easily a 10, maybe even more so. He asked me to score it again, and it was a 0. Over 30 years of carrying the trauma, and within minutes, I was able to come out a completely different person. I can't recommend him and the technique enough.